I'm into, murders and executions mostly.
Why are people so obsessed with stories about serial killers?
That instinct to want to look at something terrible so that you're safe from it is still part of our biology.
The serial killer character on screen comes in a number of different types. They can be a charming, charismatic genius, luring their victims in with skill, cunning, and manipulation.
Clean-cut, good-looking, articulate, very intelligent.
They can be a deranged, Halloween-esque monster, almost supernaturally inhuman with a whole mythology built around them.
Someone is trying to kill us in our dreams. Don't fall asleep.
Or they can be a perfectly ordinary person, fueling our fears that the worst killer can be hiding in plain sight.
The idea that a family doctor could be a multiple murderer was unbelievable.
All the old people liked him.
We can also classify killers by the kinds of motivations that drive them. There's the power and control serial killer, a sociopath who's motivated by dominating and humiliating their victims and takes pleasure in toying with the cops trying to catch them.
Oh, Mr. Policeman, don't you know a clown can get away with murder?
The visionary serial killer, who claims to be motivated by a higher purpose.
I did not choose. I was chosen.
The mission serial killer, who selects victims only from a certain class or group of people.
If I had to kill, I might as well kill people who deserved it.
And the hedonistic serial killer, a thrill seeker who gets pleasure from the intimacy of their crimes.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
While stories about other kinds of monsters tell audiences how to defeat those beasts, serial killer narratives are more often concerned with understanding the figure, uncovering the mystery of what makes them tick, and getting us inside their heads.
I try to imagine myself in his place and imagine what he's feeling.
But at its best, this kind of story confronts us with how there may not be any good explanation, or asks what it says about us that we would ever want to empathize with this agent of evil.
Love had made me blind. And now, love turned to poison.
Here's our take on the serial killer trope, and why we're drawn to stories that just might expose the monster in us.
One possibility is, I really want to be tough. I really want to be violent myself, but society won't let me.
If you're new here, be sure to subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified about all of our new videos.
When you take a look at the development of serial killers, oftentimes they come from homes that are quite broken.
The most surprising thing about the serial killer trope on screen is how much empathy they tend to engender. Viewers' capacity to feel for remorseless murderers is so powerful that this has even been satirized lately through crossovers between the serial killer trope and the comedy genre, like Barry and Trial and Error, dubbed murder coms.
Hey, man. I'm the guy that was in your house. Listen, I think we got off on the wrong foot, okay?
Part of this empathetic response stems from the widely believed theory that serial killers are a product of their upbringing. And evidence shows that high percentages of serial killers have suffered some form of abuse in childhood. Mental health specialist Abigail Struble told Vice that it's easier to romanticize someone like Jeffrey Dahmer, otherwise known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, because he genuinely wanted love and closeness.
And that's why you killed them?
Not because I was angry with them, not because I hated them, but because I wanted to keep them with me.
And narratives often choose to focus on these questions of what motivates the serial killer and why they became this way, thus building our sympathy for the damaged human being within them and making us feel they're not really just a monster.
I wish I had a best friend. Jesus, Dahmer. Forgot you were over there.
My Friend Dahmer presents an account of Dahmer before he killed, showing how he didn't fit in.
Hey kid, you're in my spot. Move!
And how he struggled to cope with his mother's mental illness.
Go back to the doctor.
Oh, God, no. I hate the doctor. The doctor always tells me what to do, just like you.
Silence of the Lambs even goes so far as to glamorize its iconic killer, Hannibal Lecter, through a persona that's dripping with charm and intellect.
Did you do all these wrongs, Doctor?
That is the Duomo seen from the Belvedere. You know, Florence?
By contrasting Lecter with the more deranged, out-of-control killers in his cell block, the film makes us feel immediately safer with Hannibal because he's self-possessed, brilliant, and cultured.
I would not have had that happen to you. Discourtesy is unspeakably ugly.
Even though, rationally, we know this only makes him more dangerous. We also see Lecter through the point of view of Clarice, who's seduced by his intellect and assistance.
I'm offering you a psychological profile of Buffalo Bill based on the case evidence. I'll help you catch him, Clarice.
And increasingly in the sequel, Hannibal comes to see him as a quasi-romantic figure.
Could he daily feel a stab of hunger for her and find nourishment in the very sight of her? I think so.
This portrait works because the victims of Hannibal's crimes are largely off-screen or written off as the unlikable punchlines of witty jokes.
I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner.
Dexter carries on these tropes of the helpful serial killer and the empathy-building origin story by showing us that Dexter's urge to kill was ingrained in him.
What happened changed something inside you. It got into you too early. I'm afraid your urge to kill is only going to get stronger.
Again, due to a tragic early childhood event.
Please don't cry. It's gonna be okay. Not in front of my baby.
But Dexter goes even further by letting us potentially justify our empathy for the murderer thanks to Dexter's moral code. He only targets society's worst criminals, the really bad ones who seem to deserve it.
I did her. How? It's not film, but I'm not sorry.
No, I'm not sorry either.
In stories where a woman is the culprit, statistically unlikely given that in real life they make up less than 15% of all serial killers, the audience is likewise often encouraged to feel swept up in her cause. In Takashi Miike's Audition and Patty Jenkins' Monster, the female killers, who only target men, were former victims of male abuse.
母の再婚相手が私のことをひどく嫌ったんです。私は毎日学校から帰ると母が帰ってくるまで。
We might empathize with both Asami and Eileen because their revenge alludes to a righteous feminist anger. In serial killer stories where we're invited to empathize with the monster, there's a constant tension between the narrative, on the one hand, comforting us by humanizing the killer and erasing their monstrosity.
Ich will davon, von mir selber davonlaufen, aber ich kann mir nicht entkommen.
And on the other, forcing us to face that the monster is what we really came for. Even if we might feel okay about silently endorsing Dexter's vigilante justice,
The best deed I can do is rid the world of you.
we're also being challenged to question if this means that some part of us is secretly sociopathic too. In these narratives, our ability to, at least to a degree, side with the killer is an extension of our desire to figure out what kind of a society creates them, and even what part we may have had to play in that. And some of the most challenging or insightful serial killer stories draw us in with these techniques, only to throw our fascination back in our faces and make us feel complicit in the character's crimes. This phenomenon is satirized in the faux documentary Man Bites Dog, in which a student film crew follows a serial killer committing crimes, becoming more and more involved with the murderers themselves as the story goes on.
C'est Docker, c'est un médicament pour les gens qui souffrent du cœur. Donc ici, j'ai foutu une trouille bleue, ce qui me permet d'éviter de gaspiller une balle, tu vois.
Lars von Trier also invokes this complicity in The House That Jack Built, drip-feeding the audience the more horrific elements of Jack's character in an almost comedic manner.
I've always taken ethical hunting rules very seriously. On that point, I think of myself as a bit of a gentleman.
Promising Young Woman takes a different angle by applying the signifiers of the serial killer trope to a woman who's hunting guys, but not to kill them, just to expose them to themselves as the predators they are.
I'm a nice guy.
Are you? And with this setup, the movie accuses us of another kind of complicity, whether we've participated in an establishment that systematically protects men at the expense of women's safety and mental health.
Because what would you have me do? Ruin a young man's life every time we get an accusation like this?
research shows that women tend to be more fascinated with reading about true crime than men.
Women, we don't watch true crime. Technically, we study it to make sure we don't end up on it.
A 2010 study from Amanda M. Vickery and R. Chris Fraley proved that women are more likely than men to choose true crime books over other violent topics such as war or gang violence, and noted that part of the attraction was an empathy with the victims of these serial killers. Quote, overall, women were more likely than men to select the true crime book that featured female victims.
Women are so often portrayed as victims in the media, and women in particular like to think about something and understand it in order to overcome anxieties.
The image of the young, beautiful, innocent victim is a common thread in serial killer narratives.
Toujours la série des filles aux yeux bleus, et toutes des étudiantes, même âge, même genre de beauté.
Et toutes disparues mystérieusement.
This fear on behalf of the innocent victim, in contrast to the quote-unquote deserving victims of a killer like Dexter, is at the center of much of our interest in biographical serial killer narratives too. In Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, the biopic of Ted Bundy investigates how the 70s predator lured women in with his handsome, charming persona, as well as how skillful Bundy was at manipulating his image in the media.
As long as the police keep their heads in the sand about me, that people are going to continue showing up dead or missing. I'm not guilty.
That film still doesn't focus much on the women he preyed on, though. Conversations with a Killer, the Ted Bundy tapes, goes further in building empathy with the victims by positioning Bundy's killing spree in relation to the growing women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s.
Women were a lot freer. There was more of an open society. New types of crimes against women became more common.
The series uses Bundy's misogynistic screeds to undercut the more romantic, media-driven myths around him with the reality of who he was.
Women are merchandise, possessions, beings which are subservient more often than not to males.
Today's focus on making sure viewers feel empathy for the victims rather than the killers can be seen as a corrective measure, countering the media's long-standing tendency to fixate on and sometimes sensationalize or glamorize the lurid details of a serial killer's crimes.
Fordi det her ikke er en perfekt forbrydelse. Det er en klodset, klam forbrydelse.
Danish drama The Investigation, about the journalist Kim Wall, who was murdered by a man she went to profile, makes the deliberate choice never to name the killer or show his face, with the show's director Tobias Lindholm saying this was not just another tale of a fascinating man who killed a woman.
Man vidste præcis, hvad der var, han gjorde. Men alle kom med dermed. Kom chanceløs.
Hallie Rubenhold's recent true crime book, The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper, likewise refuses to partake in any of the myth-making or speculation around the infamous killer's identity.
Jack the Ripper, the murderer, is completely absent from it.
And instead celebrates the lives that he took.
Each of the 5 women had very different stories and very different trajectories in their narrative.
Yu plays both sides of the coin by creating a textbook Ted Bundy-esque charming serial killer in Joe Goldberg, the kind the media would have a field day with.
I mean, you're a nice guy with your remarkable stuff.
But underlining from the start how creepy, narcissistic, and dangerous he is.
Jesus, it's like you've never seen a horror movie or the news. But you want people to watch, don't you?
Penn Badgley, the actor portraying Joe, actively tweeted his disapproval of any viewers lusting after him. Elle's Emma Dibdin argues that caring about the victims is one of the reasons for the huge popularity of true crime podcast My Favorite Murder, saying many of the most beloved episodes focus on survivor stories, while others add dimension to the lives of victims, exploring the layers of trauma a violent crime leaves on individuals, families, and whole communities.
Knowing Polly Klaas's mom, and my hometown's very small, so the entire town was very deeply affected.
This discussion underlines that while it may be innate for us to be fascinated by killers, stories have a responsibility not to cater to that drive at the expense of giving voice and reality to the precious lives they destroy.
This is not something that only happens on TV, and it's not fiction. This happens to real people, and it happens every single day.
At its core, our fascination with serial killer narratives is rooted in a desire to understand the nature of evil and learn something deeper about the human condition. Psychoanalyst Carl Jung once wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." David Fincher's Seven explores this idea through its creation of a deliberately anonymous serial killer, literally called John Doe, whose murders reflect the 7 deadly sins.
Gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, pride, lust, and envy.
Rather than going to lengths to pathologize or understand Doe, instead the film makes him deliberately absent for the majority of screen time, and we learn very little about him. When we do meet him, his distinct normalcy confuses our assumptions of what evil looks like.
About the only thing we know about that guy right now is he's independently wealthy, well-educated.
And in his final action, turning the previously hopeful, optimistic Detective Mills into a killer himself via the sin of wrath, he's in a sense proved right in his thesis that there are no innocent people.
Only in a world this shitty could you even try to say these were innocent people and keep a straight face.
The idea here is that evil is not a person, but an ever-present force in society, a low-level ambiance that we have become desensitized toward.
We see a deadly sin on every street corner, in every home, and we tolerate it. We tolerate it because it's common.
Werner Herzog evokes this philosophical approach to the serial killer genre with his documentary Into the Abyss.
I stop and I acknowledge life. Life is taken away in the moment.
The title is a reference to Nietzsche's aphorism, "And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee," and intended as a direction to the audience to, as Herzog says, look into the deepest recesses of the human soul.
When I talk to you, it does not necessarily mean that I have to like you. But I respect you, and you're a human being, and I think human beings should not be executed.
Herzog strategically doesn't pass judgment on the film's subject, the killer Michael Perry, interviewed while awaiting execution for triple homicide, or use the documentary to investigate or potentially exonerate him, like in Errol Morris's The Thin Blue Line or recent series such as Serial or Making a Murderer. Instead, the killer on death row becomes an opportunity to investigate everything from the nature of murder to capital punishment at large.
Why does God allow capital punishment?
And its psychological effects on the people who carry it out.
Could it be that you thought that this was not yourself, but maybe it was your real self?
That's a good possibility.
The problem many of these narratives end up exposing is that the nature of evil isn't always black and white.
Listen to what he has to say. Try understanding him instead of trying to dominate him.
Perhaps the most chilling and honest realization of all is that sometimes there is no explanation that could satisfy our desire to understand the serial killer.
There was no catharsis, and I gained no deeper knowledge of myself.
Criminologist Scott Bond likens our instinctive fascination with killers to looking at traffic accidents or natural disasters. Quote, "People don't want to look, but they can't look away."
You bet that you'll be alive tomorrow at 9 o'clock, and we bet that you'll be dead.
Consuming this kind of media can provide a catharsis. It's a way to confront our fear of death in a safe environment, providing both an adrenaline rush and a sense of relief.
Murder show, every type of murder show. Late night true crime, this is my relaxing time.
American true crime writer Harold Schechter describes our fascination with the figure as a kind of cultural hysteria, given that in reality they represent less than 1% of murders in the US each year. And he portrays these stories as, quote, "fairy tales for grown-ups." There's something in our psyche where we have this need to tell stories about being pursued by monsters. But maybe our willingness to empathize with serial killers says more about the nature of humanity than their actions ever could.
Did you see the jinx? This guy killed 3 people, and yet you'll watch it, young lady, and you'll go, I like this guy. Why do I like this guy?
Author and serial killer expert Peter Vronsky says that humanity's capacity to kill is intrinsic to the human survival mechanism, adding, perhaps it's not that serial killers are made, but that the majority of us are unmade by good parenting and socialization. The serial killer trope affects us so deeply because it reminds us how thin the line that we're all walking is. Serial killers contain both monsters and human beings within them, with the potential to be drawn out, just like us.
It's more comfortable for you to label me insane.
It's very comfortable.
This is The Take on your favorite movie, shows, and culture.
Thank you so much for watching and for supporting us.
Please subscribe and never miss a take.